This is the English language section of Free Radio Europe. Welcome from Strasbourg, the European Parliament. Today we'll discuss German politics, the meaning of conservatism, and the Conference on the Future of Europe. And I bring you a special guest, a rising star of German and European politics, someone who deserves to be much better known in Poland than he is already, Professor Sven Simon. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
You've been in politics since a very young age. You are a PhD and a doctorate. You've studied both in your native Germany and in Britain and the United States. And like me, you are now a member of the Conference on the Future of Europe. You also sit on the INTA Committee for International Trade and the Committee on Constitutional Affairs here in the European Parliament. Professor Simon, please tell us who is going to win the next German election and why is it going to be CDU?
It will be the CDU, yeah. So you gave already the answer. It will be Armin Laschet. Armin Laschet will be the next Chancellor of Germany, and I think that is very good. He started his political career here in this house in the European Parliament. He's pro-European and he has really a clear vision on the future of Europe, and for that reason he will win these elections. I'm very convinced about that.
Will he be good for Poland?
He will be good for Poland. There was a question in the television on, that's always a question in Germany, a newly elected chancellor, what country, what member state of the European Union will you visit first after the elections? Is it France, like the old tradition? Is it Brussels, or is it Warsaw? Is it Poland? No, but I think he didn't answer, and he said I think it was wise not to answer before the elections. First he should win the elections and then decide on that. But he will also be a good chancellor for the relations to Poland. Poland is a very important neighbor for Germany. We should strengthen ties between those two countries. I think that is very important.
There were some stories in the German press recently that Angela Merkel has lost patience with the current Polish government. Do you give it credit?
Well, it's difficult in the moment with the Polish government, I would say so. We face problems in Poland when we talk about European values, when we talk about the rule of law, when we talk about the Constitutional Court. That's quite problematic. And when this was reported,
the Polish government would say, you lecture us about European solidarity. What kind of solidarity has Germany shown with Central Europe by building Nord Stream?
Yeah, the Nord Stream topic was communication disaster from the German side. When I was in Poland some years ago, I only found out by then that there is a problem. We didn't even know about that problem in the public. We didn't even discuss it. And I think there are two problems. That is not only building this pipeline, which I think still makes sense if we want to fight climate change. We need more gas in the near future, and we would also need that gas. But it was a communication problem as well. It's a question of trust.
I mean, Russia now has more capacity to export gas than she exports gas. The purpose of Nord Stream is not to export more gas to Western Europe, is to export it without going through Ukraine, Slovakia and the Czech Republic, to be able to cut off Eastern Europe while still serving German and West European customers. It is to deprive these countries of their transit fees.
It was never my impression that this was the purpose.
But it's President Putin's impression, and he says it quite openly.
He says it quite openly, okay. But I mean, Germany. I mean, it's a question of trust, of course. And here I'm deeply convinced, with the Chancellor Armin Laschet, you can trust Germany, and I really don't see the risk, even if I see that there is a totally different discussion in Poland ongoing compared to Germany. In Germany it is, even if that might be seen to be naive from the Polish perspective, but it is not a geopolitical project against...
It's not naive, it's just selfish.
I'm convinced that you can trust Germany on that issue.
What do German electors now want? Do they want stability or do they want change? For example, will the Greens be in the next coalition?
Well, that depends on the elections, and we have, as you most probably know, always coalition governments in Germany. And if there would be, for example, the possibility for CDU, CSU plus the Liberal Democrats, if that would make 48, 50%, that would be the best choice, I think. If that is not possible, then there is a high chance that the Greens would come in that
But the
coalition.
Greens are now a mainstream party, yeah?
That depends a little bit on the polls. In the beginning of the election campaign, when they announced that they will also have a chancellor candidate, they were quite high, but now they are shrinking, below 20%.
I mean, in what they propose.
A mainstream content-wise. But this is also a challenge for the CDU and for the union, that we tackle the topics people are interested. And environmental protection, fighting climate change, we have to do that more convincingly, and then we will bring those voters back to us.
Protecting the environment is a conservative issue.
Yes.
It's about conserving our patrimony, isn't it?
Absolutely. It was the CDU who had the first environmental minister on the federal level. That was a CDU minister. It was our idea, and it was always very much to our roots and our conviction, environmental protection.
How concerned are you about the rise of nationalism in Germany? The AfD result in some parts of East Germany, for example.
Yeah, Germany is split in so far, East and West. That, of course, has
You
to
don't
do
like to remember that you're partly a post-communist country.
Yes, that is a very good point, because here in the European Parliament also we have too often, I think, the Western European view, and that helps right-wing populists in those countries where they are strong. I must say, in the moment, I don't see the risk so much. Before the European election, for example, that was one reason why I decided to run for office in the European Parliament, because there was really the danger that we would have a majority against pro-European politics in the European Parliament. They didn't manage in the end. We have a pro-European majority here in the House. And in Germany, my impression is that people, the more and more they think about it, then the more they see how radical AfD is, right-wing, far right-wing, extremists. They are not so attractive for voters.
But there are whole parts of the German electorate
in Eastern Germany.
In Eastern Germany, and also immigrants from the former Soviet Union in Western Germany, that are in the Russian information bubble. And we are talking about a few million people.
Yeah, possibly. I don't know whether it's so much the Russian influence. It's, in my opinion, what we sometimes did as a mistake is we didn't take the concerns of those voters seriously. When we communicate, as I mentioned before, we also here communicate very often from the Western European perspective. For example, on Monday we had an interesting discussion on the question why historically Strasbourg is the capital of Europe. And we had only 2 colleagues from Croatia who joined this event, which was highly interesting. And our colleague from France, Arnaud Dorjean, asked the question to the 2 colleagues from Croatia, what's your perspective on Strasbourg? Because we always see Strasbourg and the European Union as a Western project of peace, prosperity and stability. And here we have to open up. And very similar is the discussion internally that people with a different own biography, living in this communist dictatorship in Germany, we have to address differently from those who have the Western German or Western European biography. That is different. And sometimes we have to find a different wording, perhaps explain a little bit more. On the refugee and migration policy, they have different feelings, and we have to address those feelings if we don't want to lose them to the right wing.
Europe will be truly united when both sides of the former divide feel each other's pain. So, you know, when they feel that each other's historical traumas.
Yes.
I didn't know before coming to Strasbourg what a tragic history this city has had, and the changes of affiliation and so on. My objection to Strasbourg is this building, which is unbelievably badly designed. And also, I think we have given, the previous commission has given France a very attractive offer to turn the seat into the physical seat of Europe Institute of Technology. So this would be a permanent technological university, which I think would be better for the city and for France, quite frankly.
No, I stand really closely to France on that issue, and I don't argue with the treaties. It's written in the treaties that the seat of the European Parliament is Strasbourg, but also for the historical reasons, we should remind ourselves that we have a history in Europe of 2,000 years of war, and in the Western Europe, only 70 years of peace. And no city in Europe stands symbolically so much for this history than Strasbourg. So I will fight for the French.
Gdańsk.
Yeah, sure, there are other cities, but on the other research institution, I'm very much in favor of that, but we will find a different building. We would need more common European research. In the moment, we have national universities, and then we have those research funding projects where we do research together. But what we would need is, when we think about artificial intelligence, beating cancer and other issues, we would need real European research institutes. We would like to call it Marie Curie Institute. That's written in the EPP paper for the Conference on the Future of Europe, for example.
Sure. We had a Polish-German discussion, which I took part in, and I made a compromise with my then colleague Frank-Walter Steinmeier on the naming of the Copernicus program.
Yes.
We agreed on the Latin version in the end, and I think that was a good European solution. But coming back to nationalism, as you know, several nationalist far-right parties, some post-fascist really, have made a pact to oppose further European integration. What do you think of AfD's participation in that pact?
Well, as far as I know, they didn't sign this letter recently. They haven't been asked by Orban to sign it. That was what I heard, but I have no evidence for that. So they didn't do that. I mean, AfD is split in the European integration question. Of course, there was a decision in the last party convention for Dexit, but we have also colleagues who we still can convince, and the voters, and that is the most important point, I think. If we are successful, and I think it's easy for us to convince people that the European integration project is a success and we need it even more than ever, and if we discuss the right topics during the Conference on the Future of Europe, we will bring those voters back to a pro-European way, which is the right way.
You're a member of the Union of European Federalists.
Yes.
What do you say to those sovereignists who say, well, that's an attempt to make a kind of larger Bundesrepublik?
Yeah. I think the question in theory to discuss this finality question, whether we want to have a federal state or a Europe of nations, is not the right approach. We have to convince people what policy fields need to be done together to be successful, to be visible in the world.
Let's nail this, because they say we want a Europe of fatherlands.
Yes.
Europe has always been a union of fatherlands and will always be one.
Absolutely.
It's also a union of member states. The nationalists say we want some issues to do with national identity, to do with religion, to do with public morals, to remain in the purview of the member states forever.
Yeah.
I have to say I have some sympathy with that view.
Yeah, let me describe it with two different mottos the European Union and the United States have. The United States has the motto E pluribus unum, one out of many. The Europeans never managed that, and they don't want to. The motto of the European Union is united in diversity, and that is something totally different, I would say. So we need the nation state.
And the ever closer union is between the peoples of Europe, right?
It is, but here for the ever closer union, I would also propose that we need a shift of paradigm. When we compare the situation to Schuman 70 years ago, what was the task of, founding the European Union? It was peace, welfare state, liberties. And what we need now is not an ever closer union. We should more, have some kind of a paradigm shift from inward looking to outward looking. The world orientation, in which policy fields, security and defense, energy union and fighting climate change, in which policy, innovation and digitalization, in which policy fields do we have an added value of working together in Europe, and there we should be strong, and there we need supranational power without talking about the question whether we should would abolish the nation state. Of course not. That's where the people have the identity.
I would like to explore that further because the geopolitical argument for the EU is something that I share. But let's nail you down on this issue of whether some things should never be subject to EU law. Do we really need a pan-European law on abortion or on gay rights?
Well, we need certain common standards when we talk about those human rights issues. I mean, abortion, we have very different perspectives. I was in Sweden 2 weeks ago, and they have a totally different discussion in Sweden compared to other member states. In Germany, we are in between. But when you speak about LGBTI rights, I mean, the focus here is very much, too much on it. It's not the only topic we should discuss, and there are others.
Shouldn't societies be allowed to come to their view at their own pace? Within the framework of human rights protection, yes. And non-discrimination.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that is...
That's a tough one.
I'm looking here through the window on the European Court of Human Rights. And the European Charter of Human Rights is very clear in non-discrimination for sexual orientation, and that must be clear. There are definitely red lines in Europe, but when we speak about broader day-to-day policies, that is then perhaps also there's some space or room for maneuver in nation states as well. So that is, I think, my answer.
Sure. You have presented an ambitious vision of what the Conference of Europe should achieve, namely a wholly new vision for the EU. It ought to become more focused, able to act, and democratic. Today's challenges require a paradigm shift towards a global orientation so that Europeans can protect each other on the world stage. So, not a superstate, but a superpower, as Tony Blair put it?
I don't know whether it's superpower, but the conference represents a crucial juncture for Europe now. The European Union is still the largest single market, and it has political weight. Our values of individual freedoms, the rule of law, democracy, and individual freedoms, I mean individual freedoms, fundamental rights, which we can bring in front of a court. That's the big difference for which the Europeans fought for 300 years. It's still attractive, but our model is no longer unchallenged. There are unilaterally acting superpowers like China, like India, and for example...
And sometimes the United States.
And sometimes the United States, which is not that close ally than it has been the last 70 years. They sometimes have different interests. And there are emerging powers claiming economic and political influence, and China in particular is competing with the West in its promise of prosperity. So we have a competition of systems. And here I think the more powerful economically we are, the better we are in preserving our standards, our values, our rights worldwide.
I'm hearing something that's very interesting to a Polish ear, namely a German politician admitting that vis-à-vis China, even Germany is a medium-sized country.
It's a small country. But we have two kinds of countries in Europe. We have small countries and those countries who know that they are small. I mean, Germany is 1% of the world population, and this makes it very clear also to voters, also to people, why we need European ability to act. At the beginning of the 20th century, Europeans have been 20% of the world population. Nowadays, we are 7%. In 2050, we will be 5%. The African continent is growing by 1 million people per week. So the superpowers, China, more than 1 billion, India, more than 1 billion, Southeast Asia, more than 1 billion. It's so obvious that a little country like Germany, with 1% of the world population, cannot compete with China.
I agree with your argument that in a world of superpowers, only by sticking together can we defend our interests and can we get an acceptable deal that maintains our standard of living.
I think so.
And you can see it in trade negotiations, whether with China or the United States. But we have already pledged ourselves to have a foreign policy in common. And if you read the Lisbon Treaty, the language is actually very tough. but it is not being observed.
Yes.
I mean, the EU is not in the lead on anything, whether on Iran, on Ukraine, on various issues. Member states, including Germany and others, freelance. They agree something in Brussels, and then on anything that they feel is important, they do it their way. What do we do about that?
Talk about it and convince politicians. It's a question of awareness. We have still in foreign policy the unanimous voting in the Council, and that hinders us a lot. Take this example when we want to put sanctions on Belarus, right. And then it was blocked by Cyprus. With a totally strange argument. They argue that the European Union is not supporting them enough in the fight against the Turkish dictator. I mean, of course, there was perhaps a reason for it, but
we had a debate about it yesterday, huh?
Yeah. So, and this is our problem. It's a problem of awareness. I understand that foreign policy was always in the domain of not only the nation states, but the governmental branch of the nation states. And here the Council is really problematic. But if we want to have a say, and the Iran example is the best example, why haven't we been not successful when Donald Trump cancelled this treaty with Iran? I mean, independently whether that was right or wrong, but the Europeans didn't have a say, since their currency is not strong enough, and since they didn't speak with one voice on the international stage.
It's not just the currency. We don't have a payment system that would be autonomous.
Yes.
Vis-à-vis the dollar system through the Bank of New York.
That is
we
what I mean.
tried to create it for trading with Iran on non-sanctioned items such as pharmaceuticals
yes.
and food, but let's face it, it's failed miserably. It has not been used.
It's true, yeah.
And for European strategic autonomy to mean anything, we would also need to have some autonomous defense capacity, so that if the US says, well, next time you have a problem with Libya, it's on your doorstep, you deal with it, so that we're capable of actually fulfilling the task. But we're not, are we?
Absolutely, we are not, and we would need a defense capacity for the Europeans. And here I think it's also the conference gives us the chance to discuss certain issues. When I prepared this paper for the EPP, we were discussing about a European army. And the colleague from France said, oh, that's absolutely not possible with us. You cannot do that.
We took part in the same discussion in the EPP, and we arrived at a compromise view, didn't we?
Yes, we did. And also Portugal, they have also a different view on defense policy. They have this first international treaty with the United Kingdom, and they will
from the 14th
always
century.
Absolutely, and they will always stick to them, and they won't take orders from Brussels or so. But if we label it somehow different, that we need common armed forces, that we need a defense unit, that we need, I mean, for example, procurement. We are so ineffective in Europe. We have 120 weapon systems, or what the US Americans have 20, so that's much more efficient. We are wasting money.
I think if you define the European army as a joining of national armies, it'll never happen. And that's why I think it's a red herring and a discussion that does more harm than good.
Yes.
When the Americans were fighting the British in their War of Independence, they didn't join up the state militias. They created something new, the Continental Army. Mm-hmm. And that's why I've been an advocate of the European Legion.
Yes.
And I think we've now congealed on that subject. But if memory serves, we also agreed on, as an EPP proposal, on a defense commissioner, a defense council, and a joint headquarters.
Let's start with cybersecurity, for example. It's so obvious, and there's no national infrastructure which has to be destroyed. So that's a future topic where we are not on top of our defense. We cannot defend ourselves in the moment. That's the truth.
Mm-hmm. We were here in Strasbourg a couple of weeks ago for the initial meeting of the conference on the future of Europe, and my impression was that the presentations could broadly be defined into two categories. Some people were presenting a menu of what they would like the EU to do. Mm. And of course, there are things that obviously our people want. One of them is is a defense union, another a health union. The pandemic has taught us that. But it's one thing to say what we want. It's quite another to say how to get there. And those constitutional issues on which you are an expert of how to reapportion power, how to redesign institutions, those are much trickier, aren't they?
They are, absolutely. I mean, I also would see those two pillars. One is the question, in which policy fields have we, as Europeans, established a union able to act? I already mentioned some of the policy fields. And the other question, and we have to discuss that. When we talk about the health union, there's a different understanding in some Eastern European and Southern European states compared to Germany. I would, for example, say, when we talk about the health insurance scheme, that should, I wouldn't say never, but in the moment, the time is not ripe to supranationalize health insurance schemes. But when we talk about research, beating cancer and so, then we should use the economies of scale much more than we do. So, and the second pillar is perhaps more important, not more important, but more trickier and more difficult to find a consensus. That's the institutions. In the moment, we have a lack of accountability. And you see that very much in the Commission. When we talk about the vaccination production and that procurement, it's very differently seen. In Germany, it was a really disaster. From the German perspective, it was a disaster. But nobody knows.
The vaccine was made partly with European money.
Yeah.
In Europe,
yes.
The production facilities in Europe,
yes.
And yet it was exported at the time when we desperately needed it.
And
right?
too slow, yeah. I mean, the exportation was, I think, that was, I mean, right, not only for solidarity reasons, but we need raw materials which come from outside. So if we would have followed the same policy of the United States, which I think was wrong, for other reasons as well, but we wouldn't have been successful because then others would shut down the border. Shutting down the border is a reflex in a pandemic, which is understandable, but still not rationally thought.
But we did
the right
sacrifice
thing.
some solidarity for speed, didn't we?
For
speed.
I would say so, yes.
Vaccination.
But what I wanted to say is, when we speak about accountability and visibility, who is accountable for that? Nobody knows in Europe. Is it the Commission? Is it the Health Commissioner? Is it the national health ministers? Nobody knows. So here we need to have a clear structure in a democracy.
So would you be in favor of Parliament being able to impeach or sanction individual commissioners?
Yes, I would say so. And first of all, I think we would change the Commission. We would need in the European Parliament a clear majority and minority. Majority holding the Commission. And then the Commission must be, I don't know whether we call it government or whatever, however we would call it, but in the moment it doesn't make sense that commissioners are sent by national governments. And we have a mixture of all parties, an all-party commission, and that doesn't make sense. We need an accountable commission. If the European Parliament, and then we need also, people want to choose when they elect. They have the impression during European elections, it doesn't matter, it doesn't count whether I go there and vote. There's also always a big...
I think the last...
changed a bit?
At the last election, people did watch what other countries were doing. And if the Commission was a product of a majority here in the European Parliament, that would mean we would here be much more disciplined in how we were able to vote.
To a certain extent, it would definitely limit the freedoms and the rights of single MEPs. A single MEP is in the European Parliament much more powerful than in most national parliaments. That's true. If you get the real file, you are more powerful than a national minister in most member states.
Should we have... Sorry.
Yeah, but that's controversial, this discussion, but absolutely.
But I'm glad we're having this discussion, and I hope, we'll have it, we still have almost a year. Parliament with the right to initiate legislation?
Yes, not so much in the situation initiating new regulations or directives, but changing, amending existing. That's the point which I criticize. If we in our constituencies go home and find a regulation which is not functioning, which is not properly, which is too bureaucratic or so, we would need a right of initiative here in the House to change, to amend that regulation, and that is not possible in the moment.
With the decision still in the trialogue. But we could initiate.
Yes, we could initiate, yeah.
European budgets synchronized with the term of Parliament?
Yes, I would say so.
That would be sensible, wouldn't it? That the Parliament would be debating its own budget,
Absolutely.
which
I mean,
then
that
could be
in the moment
yeah.
doesn't make sense. I mean, I think the general mistake, and that is in an abstract description of the Lisbon Treaty, is that we established a political union, but the structure of the institutions is not appropriate to make it visible political decisions. So one of the problems of the European Union in the moment is that highly politicized issues are decided here, but in an unpolitical mode, in a way.
The Spitzenkandidat system wasn't exactly a success last time around.
Yeah, that was obviously not a success. It was not a success because politicians promised something which was apart from what is written in the treaties. I mean, it is written in the treaties that the European Council proposes a candidate taking into account the outcome of the elections, and then the European Parliament votes for this candidate for the Commission President. And I think we should take, as long as the treaties are there, take them seriously, but I agree that we need a face to pick that runs the Union. So the principle itself was right. There needs to be a candidate, a lead candidate. We shouldn't call it Spitzenkandidat thing because that is not translatable from the German word. But we would need a person who then is elected from the parliament, I would say. I'm not so much a fan of a direct vote. I was in earlier years. I once published an article, a direct vote, to pick the face that runs the union, but that would weaken, I think, the parliament, and we should strengthen it, even if not all problems of democratic legitimization are solved when we give the European Parliament more power. I'm not one of those guys who is always claiming more powers for the European Parliament and everything will be solved, any problem will be solved. That's not true.
Sure. Joining the office of the President of the Commission with the office of the President of the Council?
Yeah, that is a misconception of the Lisbon Treaty, that we have a President of the European Council. Doesn't make sense.
We have this competition about who is representing the EU in foreign bodies. It's not serious, huh?
No. Doesn't make sense.
Let's finish with the qualified majority voting, because that is obviously very controversial. What do you say to the argument that now that Britain has left the European Union, the German share of your shareholding in this business has arithmetically risen from about 20% to about 25%, which reflects your population. But it means that it's much easier for Germany to create a coalition, at least a blocking one, than for anybody else. Mm-hmm. And that therefore German power inside the EU has risen and under QMV would rise further.
Yes, but, with a big but, sometimes I'm wondering whether Germany is really using this power. And if you look on the precise policy fields, economic policy, state debt, currency policy and other issues, I wouldn't say that the general line of Germany and the Nordic countries was strengthened with Brexit. It was weakened, since the majorities are different now. When we speak about state debt, economic policy and other issues, then we have now a shift to a majority for, well, what Southern European member states see in their interest, lies in their interest.
Well, the Recovery Fund is a limited realization of what the South always wanted,
yes,
which is a mutualization of debt, but with a limit, right?
With a limit, and we still didn't have this risk of moral hazard, since the European Union decides of spending the money and is liable in the end. I think the mistake which was made here is that I would like to see the money taken for common goods, common European goods, common European interests, and to use the money to reduce the macroeconomic deficit between Southern European states and Northern European states. I fear a little bit that national governments will take the money, put it in their pocket and spend it for their projects.
Well, they are having to submit the recovery plans, and as the news since yesterday, Hungary's plan is being questioned by by the Commission on the grounds that there are not enough safeguards to protect the money from corruption.
Yes.
Hungary has the highest number in the EU, highest proportion of funds questioned by anti-corruption, by Olaf, which seems correct to me. But isn't it a warning to Poland as well on the issue of rule of law?
Absolutely, and it is very good that we have this rule of law mechanism now into force since this year. And it is a warning, it is a clear warning. If you don't follow the rules, I'm deeply convinced that the European project will only be successful if we strictly follow the rule of law. And if not, and if corruption is discovered, of course we can nobody explain why we give from the European level money to a member state where corruption is going on, obviously, and we cannot sanction this member state. So we should make use of this instrument. I think my impression is that the European Commission is working hard on implementing and enforcing this instrument. The guidelines are needed for non-discrimination in applying this instrument, but it should be applied by the end of the year. And I'm sure it's not only Poland and Hungary. The Commission will come up with more member states and cases in more member states where the rule of law is not applied properly and where there is a risk of corruption.
Any message to the people who are watching us, mostly in Poland, about Germany's role, about the future of the EU that you'd like to make?
Well, I think we should make the friendship between Poland and Germany even closer. And the European Union is the best project perhaps Europeans have ever invented in human mankind or in history. So let's work on it together. Let's overcome controversies. Let's speak open and friendly about different perspectives and issues. And then I'm deeply convinced that Europe and the European Union, or Europe, can be the continent on which we live best in the world, also in the future.
Sven-Simon, thank you very much for your time. Looking forward to working with you further on the Conference on the Future of Europe.
Thank you very much indeed for inviting me and having me here.
Thank you. This has been the English language section of Radio Free Europe. If you've liked what you've watched and heard, please like us, follow us, share the content on your channels. Thank you very much and see you next time.